Hi, my name is Philip Roberts, and this is my vlog for Game Design as Cultural Practice at Georgia Tech. And this is my vlog for Dear Esther. For the visual design of Dear Esther, it aims for somewhat of a realistic approach. Overall, though, the game is quite visually depressing and dreary. The cryptic writings and drawings are somewhat eerie and ethereal. In many ways, the dark and cloudy island can said to be mirroring the dark and cloudy mind of the narrator. I won't say much about the sonic design. It's sufficient and does well to kind of reinforce the dark and melancholy of the story. The interactions are fairly straightforward as well. You walk to where you need to go, and if you need to, you'll either crouch or turn on your flashlight. There's not really any special interactions that aren't already handled for you. Really, this helps you focus on the story as you're not trying to worry about mechanics or interactions. The narrative design is somewhat cryptic and the focus of the game. As you walk around, various pieces of a storyline are revealed to you, but they're all out of order and sequence. These are all letters spoken aloud by the narrator as you walk around, and generally directed to a woman named Esther. Over time, certain characters are talked about and their past, Esther, the relationship of Esther and the husband or the narrator is revealed, as well as the history of the island to a certain degree. It's all very opaque and it leaves you room to decide what it means. Who is the narrator? What's his relationship? What happened? And what is this island? Mechanically, more of this is revealed as you walk throughout the island. This aspect could almost reflect the way someone ruminates and thinks in their mind, replaying different fragments of memory. The only way to fail in a mechanical sense is to walk into the water, which will quote-unquote kill you, but then you'll just end up back on the island again. It seems that certain narrations may also be tied to how far you've walked, certainly, or where you've walked contextually based on the location. You walk around for a certain amount of time and distance until eventually the ending plays. I'm not really a fan of it and what it could be interpreted as implying, but it is what it is. Overall, the experience felt somewhat sad overall, and it's not really something I would play in my own time. I could see how someone who's a fan of the sort of cryptic, non-linear storytelling could find this somewhat engaging. To me, though, I found the island itself and the mechanics of moving around somewhat uninteresting. I'm not sure what these add that another form of interaction might have done better. If there were some more interesting artifacts to examine and interact with, or a better framing device than just an empty barren island, maybe I would have found this a little more engaging. Relating this to our secondary criticisms, especially The Art of Failure by Jesper Juhl. Juhl spends a lot of time talking about the mirroring of the protagonist and the mirroring of the player's emotions and mood. In the case of Dear Esther, for the player to be successful, we have to listen to the tragedy of the narrator and ultimately watch oneself commit suicide, or some form of it depending on how you interpret the ending. Also, because the game is played through a first-person perspective, it's more implied that you are the narrator. There is no avatar in front of you emoting and separating you from the game. I think Jules also a little reductive in the way that he talks about suicide games and how no one would want to play one. He presents Marie Lawyer's Ryan's arguments and gives several examples of games where the protagonist dies or suffers, and argues that these are ultimately unsatisfying. Although a lot of these games, Shadow of the Colossus, God of War, Red Dead Redemption, these games were all critical and commercial successes, so I'm not really sure what the point is. At least a few people out of the millions that played them must have enjoyed them. If we are so wired to avoid tragedy and failure, then why would someone play a game like Dear Esther? Obviously they do. This game has its share of fans. I think with Jules' argument, there's a confusion of mechanical failure versus narrative failure, which is better defined in Salen and Zimmerman from their model of gameplay. If you fail at a game of darts, you fail mechanically. You couldn't perform the correct motions to hit a target. and in that way you feel bad because you failed. Trying to extrapolate this to a narrative failure disregards the history of human storytelling and how we emote and relate to each other through stories. Going all the way back to the Greek tragedy and even further, people want to hear about other stories, even or especially if they're bad. It's a harsh reality, but failure is part of life and living. Yes, we avoid going through it physically ourselves, but that doesn't mean we stop talking about it, stop narrating our stories to other people. If anything, there's a certain catharsis to sharing our stories, to letting other people know that we're not alone in our trials and failures. This is what I feel that Dear Esther does well that takes apart Jules' argument. Mechanically, there is no real failure in Dear Esther. It's a narrative failure. It's watching the failure of a person and in their mind, and as they ruminate through that and try to figure out what's happened. It's a sad and human experience, and that's what makes it interesting. I think Jules' critique works well when you're talking about mechanical failure, and there are certain games where the barrier of entry is so high or requires such a skill level even to show up and play that I do think you do fail in that regard to try to be part of that. But ultimately, it's reductionist to take the mechanical side of things and then just blanket apply that to a narrative